Alright, Travis Wayne Goodsell, take two. You'll never understand because this is take two. I won't be adding take one to the video. So peer reviews. Cambria Anderson made a comment in my comments video, and I see that there are 2 notifications since I posted that. I don't know if she had responded immediately, was hovering to find out what my reply would be. When I was running, I thought about it, and I think she's the same woman who commented on my website when I had the Egyptian temple ritual ceremony all laid out, and she commented, "Hey, this is Mormon," and I replied back to hers indicating that no, this is Egyptian. If you recognize Mormon temple rituals in it, good for you, but this is the Egyptian one. And then she responded back and asked about how or what was my source for the council in pre-mortality of the Egyptians, because that's what the Egyptians believed. And so I had to tell her that my source is Hatshepsut. She was queen of Daoud Mose, or David Moses II, second. And he died early. Their son, David Moses, Daoud Mose III, was too young to take the throne, and so Egypt was in turmoil. What do we do? How do we have somebody lead us? We don't want to start another dynasty, because that's how dynasties got started, is the succession line for the family cut off and a new family takes over. And so they were fairly new, I guess in the middle, sort of. But it would be a shame for the dynasty to end this quickly. And the queen, Hatshepsut, decided she was going to fill in as pharaoh, a female pharaoh. She would be the second Egyptian pharaoh. So it wasn't unprecedented. It was just unusual. So I'm sure she utilized that defense, that a woman had been pharaoh previously, but she needed more than just that. And so she went to the Amun priesthood and told them that she had been foreordained in the premortal council in heaven. And they knew, because they know all, past, present, future. They know everything, and they planned out the whole universe and the earth and blah blah blah. And so she went and appealed to the Amun priesthood, utilizing that Egyptian theological understanding, and said that the gods had already known that this was going to happen, and that she was to take over on the throne until her son was old enough to take over. And that appeased the Amun priesthood, and so they approved of her becoming Pharaoh of Egypt. And she then went on a campaign to convince the people that she is the Pharaoh of Egypt, and that's when she told the story about how the god Amun-Ra, had come to her mother and conceived her. So she was really going all out on this theology of the Egyptians to solidify her legitimacy on the throne. I'm trying to think, because I altered the course of this video, because it was originally going to be Fair Mormon Destroys Church. So it was going to be apologetics. That's right, I was talking about Cambria, and I think she's the same woman who asked about the premortality of the Egyptian understanding. Whew. And so that I had to tell that to her about that. So yeah, the Egyptians had a pre-mortality council in heaven, just like Joseph Smith put in the oh man, I should pause so you don't see me yawn. And so yeah, Joseph Smith in 2 places makes this announcement that there was a pre-mortality council in heaven in his King Follett sermon, or discourse, whatever you want to call it, and also in the Book of Abraham with the Book of Abraham version of the creation story. And so yeah, Joseph Smith is right. It's just people have a hard time understanding and accepting how he could be right, because Jean Champollion didn't make his discovery until around 1820, and not much was spread throughout the world. It was kept primarily within the scholarly circles, and so unless, well, yeah, somebody had to have leaked something into the Americas, because Joseph Smith knows a few words and knows a few concepts about the Egyptians. But Mormons will say, well, that's because he's a revelator, seer, translator, and blah, blah, blah. So, but then Mormons, you got to understand, the church has already dismissed Joseph Smith as being a translator. So even if I come out and say, hey, Joseph Smith was right, the church already denies I'm correct, that Joseph Smith is correct in his translation work. The church's own statement, which you can find on YouTube, and I referred to in another video, has some guy that I have no idea who he is, but apparently he's speaking for the church and stating the true position that Joseph Smith was not a translator, and this guy is claiming, and I learned Japanese, and when I translate Japanese, I think of translation in that way. So condescendingly arrogant. What a prick. And so Mormons, you don't get it. And apologetics are the blame for all of this. All of your stupidity, all of your arrogance, all of your ignorance. And so, yeah, when Cambria asked if my work had been peer-reviewed, I had to rip her a new one in the video, and then a briefer version in the reply, which I'm expecting her to reply with an abusive attack further than what she had to have deleted in her second comment in that same video. All right, so yeah, peer review. Uh, if you're clueless because you didn't get higher education or you didn't go and get your PhD, you only went as far as bachelor's, maybe a master's. Masters should know about the peer review process. So it's just those of you who didn't really go much further than a master's. Oh. Oh man, up at 1 o'clock, done a couple of videos, gone running, had breakfast, and now I'm ready for bed. And so peer review is for scholars of a particular field to share their papers, their research, their discoveries with others in the field. And we don't get too many discoveries these days. And so it's just a person's viewpoint that they try to point out. And others in the field then have an opportunity to read that person's paper and give a review, peer review. It's not intended for the commoners of the world to read or those in other fields. It's intended for the specific field that you're writing the topic on. So Egyptian work, Egyptologists are the peers. So that needs to be understood. BYU, because of their apologetics and not actual science, have their own peer review that they created for Mormon scholarship, which really is contrary to what they actually do, because they don't do scholarship work. They do apologetic work. And there's no need to peer review apologetics. It's automatically wrong, because that's the definition of apologetics. It comes from defending a position or issue with unsound argument. They sort of leave that part out and just say, oh, it means defend. We're the defenders of the church. Yeah, it sounds great until you realize the true definition of apologetics. Then you realize, oh, you're the cause of the church's collapse. Got it. And yes, they are. And we'll get to that. And so peer review is a way to keep things in-house, to not let rogue scientists break out and reveal things that are going to humiliate and embarrass the field of study, whatever it is. And so they try to keep everything contained and controlled. And this peer review thing is the manner in which they do that. So that if somebody does come up with some radical new discovery, it won't get out. And if it does get out, people can say, oh, well, what are the peer reviews of this? Oh, they all disapprove. Okay, I'll ignore that then. Even though the guy may be right. That's why Stargate is awesome, the movie. So Daniel Jackson at the beginning is giving a lecture, and it's a bunch of his peers, and they're listening in on his new theory that the writings, or the pyramids, I guess, predate the Fourth Dynasty, and everybody is trying to say that, you know, hey, this has already been established by Khufu's name and in his blah blah blah, and well, his work was wrong. Well, who did build the pyramids? Aliens? You know, and so everybody starts mocking him because Daniel Jackson is going against his peers, those who have already established what the position of Egyptology is. And so because he's going against the grain, being a rebel, by coming up with this radical new discovery, which turns out to be wrong, it's actually older than he realized. And so yeah, Daniel Jackson was on the right track, and that Egyptology was wrong. And so that's what the movie is based on, is the ramifications and implications of how Daniel Jackson is right. And yeah, all sci-fi movies have to have a battle to save Earth, and as Stargate SG-1 and Stargate Atlantis had that. And Orville, if you missed it, go to Fox and watch it. And awesome. Part 2, awesome. And so, yeah, all sci-fi movies, space movies have to have a battle to save Earth. So, all right. So that's peer review. And so you can see that it suppresses discovery. It suppresses knowledge. And so peer reviews, yeah, they're not good. And so it's interesting that D.M. Murdoch was a high-ranking Egyptologist. She was very well known, very respected among Egyptology and Egyptologists, but certainly was not beloved of Christians. And so even though Egyptologists didn't really do much to contradict her and come out and say, no, she's wrong, that's wrong, it was Christians that did the bulk of the complaining, that no, she can't be right, it would destroy Christianity. And that's why people react. That's why Mormons, that's why you react to me and to others who say, no, this isn't right. And because you respond emotionally rather than reasonably, logically. You let your emotions get the better of you. And that's unsound argument automatically. Once you respond with emotions, and you know what it means, you throw out ad hominem. You throw out abusive comments. That's part of what an ad hominem is. And so Cambria, in her second comment, she threw in several ad hominem. That therefore I had no choice but to delete her comment because of that abusive ad hominem. But I go over it in the video, in the comment video. And so, in 1997, the church had just gotten through their September 6th scandal. That's where Packer ordered the excommunication and termination of employment of the 6 LDS Church BYU church historians, because they were making discoveries and finding documents that showed that the narrative of church history that the church had been presenting was wrong. The church had been lying and deceiving the members for all these decades, and these church historians who were just doing their job, doing research on church history. And faithful Mormons, devoted Mormons, they were approved to work at BYU. And yet, they were finding documents. You know, one of the documents, for example, was that Joseph Smith had been in jail in March of 1826. Yeah, 26, because William Morgan was in September of 26 in the same jail. And so they found that the court records showing that Joseph Smith had been arrested and was there in the jail for the charge of seer gazing, I think they called it, looking in his hat with rocks. And he was charged the misdemeanor price of $1 or something, I think. And so that they found that document, and it was Joseph Smith. And so, that's important for Mormons to know about. But it goes against what the church was teaching. You don't want members of the church finding out that Joseph was looking into a hat with rocks in it. And so, yeah, you millennials don't know any of this, because you grow up and now the church is admitting, oh yeah, Joseph Smith was looking into a hat with rocks. It was interpreters. Not in my day. They didn't say nothing about nothing. And that's their story, and they stuck to it. But then these apostate Mormons finding facts and evidence and documents and messing up the story of the church. And back then they didn't have Google. And so of course the church was still in the practice of oppression and suppression with excommunication, to threaten people to be silent, because you have to sign a non-disclosure agreement when you get excommunicated. And that's D. Michael Watson. D. Michael Quinn. F. Michael Watson is the one who came after me. And yes, he was the secretary to President Gordon B. Hinckley. So I think I've told you guys that story, not just about it. Hold on a second. I'm about to take care of some business here. Alrighty, so I need to end at 7 because I need to cut my hair, and that should be late enough that I won't disturb my neighbor as the bzzz goes on. Alright, so 1997, Daniel Peterson, member of the church, decides to form a non-profit. It's a research organization, and he called it FARMS, Foundation of Ancient Research and Mormon Studies. And I've already got the thumbnail all set up for this this video. And he thinks he's going to save and defend the church with unsound argument. And in his mission statement, he puts it in there. He knows the definition of apologetics, because he says we're not trying to prove the Book of Mormon and the claims of the church. We're not going to use scientific methodology. We're going to provide something like faith promoting examples of defense. So, oh man. So, yeah, the church was now heading for collapse and destruction. thanks to Daniel Peterson. All give hail and praise to Daniel Peterson. So say we all. I'm sure he's Cylon. We're going to find out in the next season that he's a Cylon. And so he starts that. I had just arrived in Utah in August of 1996. And then my life got shattered in 1997, in April. But I had made my discovery of the origin of the alphabet, Paleo-Hebrew, also called Phoenician, and I needed to find out other sources of information to try to confirm my work before I went and did theory testing with the vocabulary and comparison with other contemporary languages, such as Paleo-Greek, which I did, and then I eventually got a hold of a Chinese, ancient Chinese dictionary that went over the original strokes, what each stroke meant, and bingo. So yeah, Eva Vasilevska insisted that there was no collusion between Egyptian and Chinese script. It was well established that there was no collusion. Unfortunately, when I did my research, oh, there actually is. There it is. I found all of the Paleo-Hebrew letters in the Chinese script. I'm not going to get into it. I don't want to get off topic here. We're already at 30 minutes and I've got 20 minutes left. And so, yeah, that's how I was taught up in the University of Lethbridge in philosophy of science. You don't get peer reviews, although the instructor did understand peer review in that process, but he taught us logical argument, and how all you need to really do is construct your theory soundly so that it can be tested, and thus you can argue against somebody else's claim to a theory if it's unsound, and how to break apart another person's attempt to show that it's wrong. So Christianity became the perfect target for illustration because, you know, they come up with creationism. It's not a theory, guys. It's false. It's not sound. You leave out many premises, and many of the premises you do use, such as your understanding of God. He's not physical, but he's able to interact in the physical realm depending on which religious viewpoint you use. It's just, well, wait a minute. When he does enter into the physical realm, isn't he subject to physical law? No. He's above the law. He can do whatever he wants in the physical realm, even though he's not physical. And so, yeah, the thumbnail for this LDS Mormon comment replies to unsound argument has an illustration of an example of an unsound argument. Cows are insects. Insects are mammals. So cows are mammals. The conclusion is correct. Cows are mammals. However, the premises that lead to that conclusion is wrong. Cows are not insects, and insects are not mammals. And Mormons make this same mistake. because they, you guys believe that if you find out the Book of Mormon is true by reading, pondering, and praying, and the Spirit confirming it, that therefore everything else is true. The church is true. The priesthood has been restored. Joseph Smith translated correctly, and blah, blah. No, sorry, wrong. Doesn't work that way. It can work, however, in that, hey, wait a minute. If the Book of Mormon is plagiarized material, not a translation from an ancient document, well, then that puts the rest of the church in question, puts Joseph Smith in question, and everything else in question. So that is sound in criticizing and arguing, counter-arguing. And Mormons are not knowledge or educated in actual logical argument and debate, logical debate. So my dad took debate, and I still, as a kid, was out debating him. So yeah, Mormons just can't learn, or they're just not being taught properly about logical argument. And that's illustrated in Cambria's comment, as well as many of those who follow apologetics in their unsound defense of the church and Joseph Smith and his work. And so, yes, Joseph Smith can still be true, just like cows can be mammals, but it doesn't mean that everything else is correct in leading up to that conclusion. See, the conclusion still can be true that Joseph Smith was correct in his translations. It's just the way Mormons mess up the premises. These apologetics mess up the premises. And they say, well, it's not really called translation. It's more of a revelatory process. That's not translation, that's revelation. That's what the Doctrine and Covenants. He says, the eyes of our understanding were open and we had a vision. He doesn't call it a translation. The Doctrine and Covenants is not a translation. He admits that. So why then are Mormon apologetics going around telling everybody, oh, the Book of Abraham is not a translation, even though that's exactly what he said it is? It's a revelation, like Doctrine and Covenants. So, yeah, you got to recognize when apologetics are deceiving you, because everything they say is a deception, because that's their goal as apologetics, unsound argument. They're not trying to use science to defend the church. They're using fallacy to defend the church. And that's why, in many cases, when a person who actually knows their subject matter confronts an apologetic follower, they resort to emotional verbal abuse and an ad hominem. Well, you're stupid. You're an antichrist. You're an apostate. I don't need to listen to you. It's like calling somebody a subhuman creature. You're not human. And so therefore I don't have to listen to your argument. It's unsound. It's racist, which is the true meaning of racism. Ethnist is the correct wording, though we really don't use ethnist in our language. But when you hate humanity and you lower other humans into a subcategory in order to dismiss their ideas and presentation, that's what you're doing. You're being racist. And Mormon apologetics are the big proponents of that. and that's to contain information about the church as a defender of the church. And so all criticism of the church has to go through Fair Mormon. They take the bullet for the church. And they're doing it. They're ruining their lives and their careers because the church is the only ones who can hire them. John Gee, for example, Rittner was his PhD teacher, and when Gee graduated and went to BYU and was doing papers on the Book of Abraham, Rittner got a hold of him and was peer reviewing them and said, hey, no, I'm very disappointed. You know, I had him as a student, and he obviously didn't learn a thing. And so now Gee just sticks with Coptic, teaching Coptic at BYU. I think he's probably still there. He's not that much older than I am. You know, they had Hugh Nibley there till he died. And so, Mormons created, BYU professors created their own peer review process. They may put it out on a internet peer review place, but they don't really care about that. They just put it there and say, oh yeah, it's peer reviewed. No, it was peer reviewed by other Mormon scholars, which is sort of a contradiction in terms, other professors at BYU. And they just keep it among themselves. And that's a self-fulfilling prophecy fallacy, if you're unfamiliar with that tactic. It's where they present a view, and then everything about the review reinforces the view. Self-fulfilling. And that's also another danger of peer review among Egyptologists, real Egyptologists also, is that they reinforce the established position by controlling the information in papers and documents, manuscripts and such, other publications. And so, yeah, how did the apologetics destroy the church? Well, I'm sure you got an idea now. The fields of science, historians, Egyptologists, all say, hey, wait a minute, no, the evidence is saying other things. And so when the internet came along and social media, the church decided to have LDS.org, and they put on LDS.org back in 2011, I guess, they put up what's called gospel topic essays. And in those essays, there's, I don't remember how many of them there are, but one is on race and the priesthood. That's where the church admits, yeah, Brigham Young was a racist. Jesus called him to be a racist. Jesus ordered him to be a racist. Because that's what it means, Mormons. If a president of the church is racist, and he's supposedly inspired by God, why would he backtrack what Joseph Smith was doing? Because Joseph Smith was not racist, much to many people's chagrin. And Joseph Smith gave priesthood to the blacks. He tried to free slaves, even though he still had to have a 14-year-old girl clean his apartment, and I go over that in my polygamy video series. Yeah, when you have the dominant culture suppressing, repressing, oppressing, discriminating against, enslaving you can't just step up and say, hey, stop it, leave them alone, because you will get murdered and they won't find your body. And so you got to figure out a different way. You got to influence the minds. You got to infiltrate people's thoughts and change people from within. And that's the Book of Mormon, where that comes from. But anyway, Daniel Peterson's apologetics was on the forefront. All scientific questioning about anything the church makes a claim about, it's passed off to apologetics for the church. And then there's the history behind its de-evolution. Farms, then Maxwell Institute, and then he was kicked out, and he formed FAIR, and then it's become FAIR Mormon, and I think I've seen another break-off, but they're all the same ideology. Defend the church with unsound argument. And 10 minutes with 3 minutes of processing time. And so Gerald and Sandra Tanner of the Utah Lighthouse Ministries, who are now both former now. They passed on, I guess. And so I'm not sure of the stability of the Utah Lighthouse Ministry now that they're gone. I don't think anybody was as skilled and talented as they were to do what they did, which was collect historical documents of the church and show that the church has been lying. Yeah, when you take criticism about the church, so that the church leaders don't have to deal with it, because if you noticed, Mormons in the conference talks, the leaders of the church are now saying, we don't know everything. We go to BYU if we have a question. Notice that? The leaders of the church, the prophets, seers, and revelators, go to the BYU professors for answers to doctrinal, theology, ritual questions. So these gospel topic essays, who wrote them? Not the prophets. No. Yes, the apologetics. Gee, for example, is identified as the author of Historicity and Translation of the Book of Abraham. Yeah, his fingerprints are all over it. And that's the one who says Joseph Smith was wrong. It wasn't really translation in the way we understand translation. It was revelation. Joseph Smith didn't translate. And that's a huge embarrassment for the church. Because now you have these unsound arguments as a defense for the church. And so, Mormons, go back to your primary songs. The wise man built his house upon a rock. The foolish man built his house upon the sand. Unsound argument is like building your house on sand. They're foolish. What does that make apologetics? And apologists? Foolish. And when the storms come, when the rains come up and the floods come up and the rains come down, washes away the house. The Teton Dam flood. There may be many of you who remember that. My dad's parents, my dad's from Rexburg, Idaho, and my grandparents were in their new RV traveling in eastern Canada at the time of the flood. And they knew about it by watching the news out there in eastern Canada. And the way they knew was not because of the announcement, oh, the Teton Dam is flooded and blah, blah, blah. No, the picture that was shown on the screen was of a floating house, not their house, going by their house. My grandfather's house was built upon a rock and stayed firm in the flood. Even though there was a lot of mud and, oh man. So, but yeah, you gotta build on a solid foundation. You cannot build on a weak foundation. Apologetics knew this, which means, because their mission statement says, we're not going to prove anything, we're not going to use science. They knew they were on shaky ground to defend the church, which means they knew the church was false. Daniel Peterson was set up in place to do what he did to cover up the church, to lie about the lie about the lie. And thus, it's all exposed now with the internet. When the church came out with those gospel topic essays, everybody was able to see it for themselves and go, hey, wait a minute. 14-year-old boy? Not the case, but that's the accusation. And the church is saying Joseph Smith did it. And many people believed that and left the church. Brigham Young's a racist. That's right. Many people left the church. And then the ERA. Unbelievable. Church suppresses women. Many have left the church. The church has collapsed. And it's apologetics that tried to prolong the collapse. Sorry, Mormons. Church isn't true. We've all been played as fools. And it was made worse with Daniel Peterson and his apologetic group. With John Gee, John Tvetnes, even Hugh Nibley. Even though Hugh Nibley was his own guy, he was established in his own right. He didn't need the apologetic group to promote himself. It was the apologetic group who worshipped Hugh Nibley and were the big proponents of publishing his works. So, alrighty, that's that. And it's time for me to get myself a haircut and get ready for the day, and the processing is done. So, but you won't find out about that until you listen to this video, which is going to be an hour later or so. Okay, so there you go. My thumbnail's awesome. You got to get it on a big screen so you can see the print.